want to be able to join, take in the meeting later. So this is our second SWAP learning series, and this is really intended for all of you to share information, to learn about some tools, practices, in this case, guidance that'll help you with your state wildlife action plans. It's such an exciting time around here at AFWA. We are really on the cusp of one of the biggest conservation victories in generations. So there's lots of meetings going on with Recover America's Wildlife Act, and just keep getting the good news every day. So your work in revising your wildlife action plan, implementing wildlife action plan is going to become more important than ever. Hopefully at the beginning of next year, if we can get Recovering America's Wildlife Act across the finish line. So I'm going to introduce Janet Cushing from USGS. Really appreciate, Janet, you making time today to sit in on. She was really instrumental in helping us get the guidance for climate change, climate adaptation for SWAPs updated. And so I'm going to give her the floor to make some opening remarks. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you, Mark. So hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Janet Cushing. I am the Deputy Chief for the National Climate Adaptation Science Center, which is in the U.S. Geological Survey. And I've been really privileged to be able to work with AFWA for a number of years and to try and collaborate on issues related to climate adaptation for managing fish and wildlife populations. So hopefully this is not a new concept to folks here, but the idea of climate change impacts and, more importantly, adapting to climate change has a huge effect on managing fish and wildlife populations and their habitat. And for a long while now, I've really wanted to work with AFWA to try and get the voluntary guidance for incorporating climate change into SWAPs updated, because there has been such an amazing amount of science that has come about since the last version. And so I was really, really happy and delighted to be able to get things started first with Maggie Ernest-Jones, and then with Jason when he stepped in when Maggie moved on, and then with Jacob, who really just hit the ground running. I'm so impressed. So I hope everyone here, certainly if not now, then by the end of Jacob's presentation, will realize what an incredible resource this updated voluntary guidance is for state fish and wildlife managers. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the huge effort that the team put into getting this done in a remarkably short amount of time. So I feel like this was just an amazing collaboration between AFWA, some of the representatives of state fish and wildlife agencies, with USGS and some of our staff from the Climate Adaptation Science Center network, and also with our NGO partners. Just having watched how the whole process came about in trying to really make this updated guidance useful for everyone, not just state fish and wildlife agencies, but I think this is actually a really incredible resource for all managers of fish and wildlife and their habitats. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and pass it over to Jacob. And so thank you again.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you, Janet, for setting the stage there and for all of your support on this. Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you're all seeing the slide presentation now.
Yep, we see it.
Great. So thank you, everyone. So I'm Jacob Blanford. I'm AFWA's Climate Adaptation Program Manager. I am going to tag team this presentation with Jason, who, as Janet mentioned, led the effort kind of on his detail in between the transition between Maggie and I, and then stayed on as an integral member of the team. And we're really just going to scratch the surface here. This is really an amazing in-depth resource, and in 15 minutes, we're not going to be able to cover everything, but we do just want to kind of highlight and demonstrate that this is a resource that's going to help you adapt to climate change and help you reach your management objectives in a changing climate. The title of the document does a really good job of telling you what this document is about. You and your agencies are the target audience, and the purpose is to incorporate climate adaptation into the SWAP. And it does focus on adaptation, not necessarily mitigation or drawing down carbon or reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And we did work really hard to get this done now in time for you to use the document for your 2025 revision. This is an update to the 2009 guidance. And as Janet mentions, it really reflects the advances in science, in our understanding of climate impacts, and in the adaptation efforts that have been made. And the document, the guidance is designed to be used by you and your agencies, regardless of your expertise in climate change or climate adaptation. And sorry, I don't know what happened there. And also, regardless of what your state agency has done in the past to address climate change. I'm guessing you're not seeing the slide right now?
Yeah, we're seeing a spinning wheel.
Yeah, me too. I'm not sure what's
Up.
okay. Hopefully no more technical issues. So yeah, so as I mentioned, it can be used regardless of past efforts or your expertise in climate. I do just want to quickly recognize the team that put a lot of time and effort into this effort. You might see a few names you recognize of people that are in attendance in this webinar today. And as important as who was on the team, it's who they represent. So you can see here kind of the breakdown of the team. And there were 9 representatives from state fish and wildlife agencies. As the end user, it was really important for you to lead the effort also, and we emphasized that. But we did want to capture the breadth of knowledge and expertise and experience in this field. So there were members from federal agencies, there were tribal representatives, there were representatives from NGOs. But we always went back to the State Fish and Wildlife Agency folks and said, is what we're recommending and suggesting here, is it feasible? Is it realistic? And if we got a no to those questions, then we revised it. So, I mean, we really did make an effort to make it realistic so that it would be used. The guidance is organized into 4 chapters. The first is an introduction and a how-to guide. Some of the comments we got during a preliminary review was that people wanted a guide how to actually use the document. So we did add that. And chapter 1 also highlights some of the impacts on fish and wildlife and the habitats that we've seen. So if you're new to climate change and climate adaptation, this is a really good place for you to start. Chapter 2 highlights 7 principles of climate adaptation for fish and wildlife, and I'll highlight some of these shortly. Chapter 3 then goes into how you take these principles and you actually apply them to the 8 elements of a SWAP. And then the last chapter is the resources for planning, for decision support tools, for case studies and adaptation, for on-the-ground management, for monitoring. It's really, geared towards, if you read something in chapters 1 through 3 and you need more information, chapter 4 is going to have a resource for you that's going to help you learn more and implement and apply those principles. So what's listed here are the 7 principles of climate adaptation that were identified to help guide your SWAP development and to incorporate climate adaptation. These are not necessarily new principles. There are other principles, but this was just the 7 that we thought most appropriate for the swap revision process. The guidance has great detail and examples and explanations of all of these. I'm going to just highlight a few to demonstrate kind of what we're talking about, but I can't encourage you enough to actually read the guidance to fully understand these. The first principle is fully integrate climate change into a state wildlife action plan. So you're all familiar with the 8 elements. That's what's in a simplified form here. We do a survey every year to assess state agencies' efforts in the climate adaptation world. And from that survey, we know at least 82% of the states have incorporated climate change into their last swap in some capacity, but mostly it was in 1 or 2 or 3 elements. And what this principle is saying is that climate adaptation can and needs to be incorporated into all 8 elements. And we know that's a lot to ask for, but we do then go on in chapter 3 and give you all those climate change considerations for each element. And that's one of the things Jason will discuss here in a few minutes. Principle 2 is adopt forward-looking goals. Historically and currently, we've tried to manage towards a historic baseline, some pristine state from the 1800s or early 1900s. But with climate change, we're going forward. We're not going backwards. And so the climate conditions are never going to be the same as they were 200 years ago. So it's not feasible to manage to goals under past climate conditions. We must establish new goals that are achievable under future climate conditions. So for example, with sea level rise, nesting beaches across the species historic range might not be productive. They might not all be productive, but some of them are still going to be suitable nesting habitat. And those should be the areas that are prioritized. Or a fishery that's managed for cold water species might need to transition towards the management of warmer water tolerant species as water temperatures rise. When restoring degraded ranch lands, we may need to transition from restoring the species that are currently there to restoring species that are more drought tolerant for future conditions. So these are just kind of what is meant by a forward-looking goal. Skipping ahead a little bit, principle 6 is address uncertainty by considering future scenarios in the use of adaptive management. Climate change adds uncertainties that we may not have previously considered and are unfamiliar with. And uncertainty can come from a lot of areas. It's going to come from how exactly the climate changes globally, regionally, locally. There's uncertainty in how habitats and species are going to respond to climate change. We don't know how humans are going to respond, what we're going to do as far as mitigation and adaptation goes. That adds uncertainty. You can address uncertainty by planning for multiple future scenarios. Is it going to be hotter and drier, or is it going to be hotter and wetter? If you consider these future scenarios, you'll have a better plan for when the actual climate conditions occur in the future. You can also address uncertainty through adaptive management, which is the iterative process of testing an action, monitoring the response to that action, and then using the new information to maybe change management activities. And so by having a strong monitoring and assessment program, you can then adapt your management as future conditions change, as the climate changes, and as you know more how species or habitats respond. So that's just a quick, overview of 3 of the principles and a few examples of what it means. Again, lots more information in the guidance. So at this time, I am going to pass it over to Jason, who will talk about the climate considerations for each of or a few of the elements, the 8 elements. Again, he's not going to go into all of them.
Okay, thanks, Jacob. So Chapter 3 in the voluntary guidance provides specific considerations for incorporating climate change adaptation into swaps. As you know, to receive federal funding, each swap is required to address these 8 elements. So while they're specific to swaps, we're trying to make sure that these are general so that you can share them with other partners if you want. In the interest of time, I'm only going to highlight a couple of examples of how you could apply these. First is looking at identifying species of greatest conservation need, and that's foundational for SWAPs or any other management plan. And so several of the SWAP elements build on or link to the identified species, and that's, the first step in identifying the SWAP's focus. So, you're trying to identify the animals and plants, emphasizing species that are rare, declining, or otherwise at elevated risk of extinction. And you're also, I know you're looking at identifying species of significant interest to your state, as well as to indigenous peoples. So this slide only includes about half the considerations for element 1, but it demonstrates the kind of information that the guidance provides in more detail. One of the things that we're interested in is what are the species of greatest conservation need that may have healthy populations now, but what are they going to look like in 15, 20 years? And so the guidance is a reminder that habitat conditions are changing and those populations could change as a result. So we recommend putting some thought into it now. We often hear the comment that there are 1,000 species on someone's list needing conservation, and you can't do a vulnerability assessment for all of them. So we get that. So we recommend you do what you can. For example, you might be able to use an assessment from a neighboring state that most likely has similar species, habitats, or conditions, use a regional list, and there are often some reasonable solutions to overcome some of these barriers, and we're happy to help provide some advice on those. The SWAPs are required to describe how the states will coordinate with other partners, including other agencies, NGOs, and tribes. And so coordination can happen from scientific, social, and cultural perspectives. There are major landscape issues that require coordinated effort at these large multi-jurisdictional scales. And working together, we can identify what we have in common and what's different, minimize conflicts in management plans, share and leverage resources, and build consensus. And so addressing climate change on the landscape is no different. Now, the SWAPs can coordinate with those regional efforts. As a result, we're suggesting collaborating with diverse partners early and often during the planning and development phase is important. As some of you who were at the last learning series heard, it's also to be mindful that tribes should be treated differently from other partners. We are supposed to work with them in a government-to-government relationship to respect their sovereignty. And I think we're still working on the white paper to do the follow-up from the last meeting, which we'll be sharing soon. In addition to coordinating with other partners, we recommend that the SWAPs invite and involve the public in decision-making to promote trust, accountability, and transparency. This serves the public interest, can lead to improved decision-making, and help to identify, recruit, and build relationships with new constituencies. Incorporating climate change into element 8 ensures that the public has opportunities to be heard, can respond to agency priorities, and can be part of discussions about how to address climate change impacts affecting their local communities. This is an important chance to discuss those anticipated changes that climate change will have and get input on what the public wants to see in the future. You should also consider what audiences will participate and how to reach audiences you might not have worked with previously. For example, climate vulnerable communities need to be part of the discussion, which may require that you go to them. Some communities may not have the resources to travel to a town meeting. So it helps to identify local trusted leaders, form a relationship with them, and work through those trusted messengers. You can also work with a social scientist and people versed in public outreach that really help make a difference here. The guidance primarily focuses on the principles of adaptation and how to incorporate them into developing SWAPs. As we hope you've seen, those same principles should apply to many climate adaptation decisions. So things outside of the SWAP process as well. Chapter 4 provides additional resources for planning and implementing adaptation actions. We're not covering everything here. Just to note that if you need it, the guidance does have many more resources today compared to when it was first published in 2009, given the substantial growth in the field. For example, what are the key parts of a vulnerability assessment? Even if you're not able to conduct a full assessment for all species, just being aware of the basic principles can help you make more informed decisions. For example, the vulnerability of a species depends on several extrinsic and intrinsic factors. Taken together, these will give you an idea of the vulnerability of the species or system. We've already started talking about, I'm sure you heard before, about the Resist, Accept, Direct framework that's emerged as a way to help managers address ecological transformation. We sometimes talk about climate change happening in the future when in fact that change is here. And RAD outlines 3 different management responses to either resist the trajectory, to accept it, to allow ecosystems to change autonomously, or to direct our trajectory by actively shaping the change in ecosystems toward preferred new conditions. During the review of the guidance, we heard that the states wanted advice on how to talk about climate change. We have that in here. This is a rapidly growing field. And so we provided some basic information rather than inundate our readers. We also recognize that partners need funding to accomplish their goals. So we added a variety of resources to potentially seek funds to conduct climate smart conservation work. In addition to the guidance, I think many of you already get the updates that Jacob and I produce, both the research updates, the roundup that Jacob does and the research updates I do. If you don't and you're interested, just shoot us a note and let us know, and we're happy to get you on the list. So with that, want to thank you for giving us a chance to talk with you about it. And what we're going to do now is get a couple of state folks online to talk about their work. And so first up is going to be Sean Gimble, who's the Executive Policy Specialist from the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, good day. Thank you very much, Jason. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm going to open off my initial 8 minutes here with a couple further and oddball in that in our current era of post-fact politics and government, I am a very methodical and analytical person who has often been accused of thinking like a scientist or an engineer. So I take those accusations and I embrace them. They're a wonderful thing to have. Second caveat, I work for the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, and we are an independent state government agency. We deal specifically with recreational fishing, recreational boating, and the protection of aquatic natural resources. We also have in Pennsylvania an independent game commission that deals with hunting, trapping, and all things with feather and furs. And we also have 2 other state agencies that deal with the outdoor world. We have the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources that deals with forestry and state parks and all other forms of outdoor recreation. And we have a Department of Environmental Protection, which deals with the enforcing environmental regulations and laws of the Commonwealth. Now, caveat number 3, I didn't go into caveats number 1 and 2 just to talk about myself and my state. I want you to think about your own job titles and the landscapes in which you work, those spaces that you occupy professionally in the name of protecting all the critters out there. I know there are certainly similarities and differences between me and where you are. However, I want to share with you and challenge you to think about governance and how we go about our business the way I deal with every intern I have in the policy world, kind of like a policy 101 here. I think of all of us, not just in government, but in other spheres, in the nonprofit world and other places, we all kind of operate kind of like a dog in a fenced-in yard. And the suite of constitutions and laws and regulations and all of that are kind of like the fence that we live in. Bad things happen, or we're not supposed to be outside of that fence. That fence defines where we can go, where we can't go, what we can do, what we can't do. And what I want to leave you with here is, the more dogs, the more yards, the more fences, the more complicated everything gets. Again, like a good scientist, I think I'm happy and content to deal with that complexity, but other people aren't, and so we'll see how this goes. Now, Jason asked me to get into a couple questions here. Number 1, what have we done in the past to deal with climate change or address climate change? I got 2 things for everybody. 2 very kind of long-term, broad perspective things, and 1 thing much more recent and specific. Long-term, I would say that over the past 10 years or so, the climate has shifted in how we talk about things. It's gone from, you don't necessarily want to talk about it too much. We know it's there, but we're not going to talk about it, to we can talk about it now. And even in a worst case scenario, I think you can still talk about it, even if you don't necessarily use the words climate or change together. The other broad observation I have is our efforts have been and continue to be focused on the adaptation side and not so much on the mitigation side. A little bit of that has to do with, again, this, the yard in which we operate. The Department of Environmental Protection definitely has a greater role to play on the mitigation side of things than we do as an agency. But that's not to say that that's not something we need to think about. The short term and recent thing that I want to bring to everybody's attention, we just this past summer released our very first climate action plan for the agency. And if I may, a very condensed summary of what it is. It's summary of all things climate change, how it impacts us as an agency, how it impacts the resources that we protect, how it impacts the delivery of recreational fishing and boating opportunities in Pennsylvania. We went into all the issues that are there, all the strategies, the actions, and the partners we expect to work with as we navigate those challenges. I can honestly say that based on the feedback that we got so far on our plan, people really, really appreciated us for two things. One was our honesty, and the other thing was all the work that we did in developing the plan. People appreciated our honesty in admitting that this problem is really, really big. We're really, really small, and we're going to need as many partners as we can get to make the most of it and do the best that we can. We called out the names of partners as we understood the ones that were out there doing work right now with us. We called them out and we mentioned them, and they recognized that and said that what, you knew that we had a plan. You knew what lane we were in. Thanks a lot for acknowledging us and our work. You did your homework. So that was very important, and I think it's earned us a good deal of respect and space to help operate and engage further. Lastly, we recognize there are a lot of other partners out there that we're just not working with right now, and I think this document that we have is an opportunity for us to engage those new partners. It'll be helpful to them to see who we are, what we do, and what the issues are, and we can engage in that conversation with them going forward to get engaged, help protect these critters that are so valuable to us. The second question that Jason forwarded to us about how we're planning to use this new guidance, you be careful about how I say about us, because this answer is going to be a little bit broader than just we here at the Little Fish and Boat Commission in Pennsylvania. As I mentioned earlier, in government, we're all a little bit like that dog in a fenced-in yard. We all face our limits on where we're allowed to go and what we can do. However, the problem here is that the critters and habitats we're all charged to protect don't care at all about our legal authorities and what our fence looks like. As a bunch of dogs living in our own little individual yards everywhere, here's how I can see this guidance being very useful. For those of us in this session, I think it's very important for all of us to understand where we are in this new guidance document, so that we can help understand who we are, where we fit, where you are, and where you fit, and we can begin to appreciate and trust one another as we move forward. The new guidance, I think, needs to provide those spaces. So again, we can have ownership on those things. This is my, yep, that's an issue that I deal with. That's an issue for me. That's a solution for me. I think when we do that, it helps us understand others a lot better. We can have empathy for them and understand where they fit in. So this is a situation where beyond me just fitting in here, I can look at something that's desert Southwest and see that it's not my issue, but it's somebody else's, and that's what they're dealing with. I also think, to kind of wrap things up here, we can use this to help us lobby for more resources and the things that we need to do what we need to do. We can approach other people. We can reach out to those policymakers who control the purse strings and write additional laws and policies. We can say, hey, this isn't us saying it. These are other people. We can use it for cover, and we can also use it to maybe shame those people into doing things that are best for the critters. At the end of the day, climate change is a very wicked problem, as what the academics say. And for all the science and technology involved in it, I think we're at a point where the social science piece is the weak link. And that's what I look forward to this guidance, helping us navigate some of those social science pieces. So thanks a lot. Sorry if I'm a minute or two over.
You're muted, Jason. You were muted, Jason. I don't think we heard you.
Oh, sorry. So you'd think after all these years, I'd finally get it. So our next speaker is Yunko Hoshi, who's the California SWAP coordinator for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Hi, this is Junko from California. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, but thank you for joining us. And this is wonderful. And what Jason and Jacob said is true. It is really, this document is really customized for us, for SWAP planners. So take it. So this is my first comment, and I'm trying to find my slide. Let me see. I'm trying to share my. So host disabled participant screen sharing. So could you let me share?
Oh. I can make you.
Yeah.
Hang on a second.
And yeah, so my talk will be mostly like California case study basically, what we have been doing, what we have done, we intended, and so on.
So you should have access now to be able to do it.
Okay. Okay, good. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm very, I will start with this first principle addressing the guidance, fully integrate climate change in every step. So the good news for California is we attempted in 2015. The bad news here is that this presentation is going to be pretty messy because we tried to fully integrate, and so reporting what we did is kind of challenging. So with that, I decided to talk a little bit about the document structure first before we talk about what we did. And then show you in the development stage and integration, implementation stage what we did. And then integration guidance and so on. So I didn't mention about me too much, but so again, I'm from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I sit in Science Institute in the executive office, and I'm a SWAP coordinator. And I also engage in this great opportunity to develop this guidance. So what is California SWAP and how it looks like? This is a document. And we had a high level expectation. We want to make a vision and framework for the state for ecosystem and biodiversity conservation, and make a blueprint for that. We decided to approach regionally and ecosystem. Also, we want to make it very strategic, including standardize every process we can consider, and built by many internally and externally. And with that basic principle, this is what we focus, which shouldn't be a surprise for you. What to conserve, selection of species, but also ecosystem to develop strategy. And we, of course, went through the analysis. This is all right, based on our expectation to develop SWAP. And based on those analysis, we selected a set of strategy. And in conceptual form, in conceptual model, it looks like that. The far right is a target, and strategy is supposed to influence either those negative factor or the improvement of the selected items. And we did that regional approach. So this is a quick look at the conservation unit. We have 40 of them. And we also have to, we couldn't address everything in species level. So species is considered into the context of habitat or ecosystem. And we basically scale up to different level region. And the key analysis has been done in this conservation unit level. And we went to this open standard analysis to go through this analysis and selection process. And based on all those input from region, we did the cross analysis and basically report the information or funding in the province and state level. And in addition, we have a partner plan, which is published in 2016, but developed during our development stage. What it is after create the content of SWAP, we focus on 9 topics, such as water, and reach out to water partner and provided water element of the content of the SWAP and ask, are there any shared interest here? And based on those discussion, we summarize in 9 companion plans. And as you can see, this is a list, but a lot of focus are natural resources like water, marine, and forest. Now, what we did in terms of adaptation, our try is first for the selection for target, whether species or ecosystem. We heavily depend on species vulnerability study. Also, we did use province level climate projection targeted to 2050 and the end of the century. A little bit more about this vulnerability study. We have 5 sets addressing 800 species, and 4 of those reports have been used for selecting those SCCM. For vegetation vulnerability study, we wanted to use this study funded through SWIG to prioritize ecosystem, but the project got delayed. So we published this report after the document has been, SWAP document has been released. So that's a vulnerability study and selection of priority. Now for the analysis, we heavily depend on this province level climate projection, which has not only climate projection, but ecosystem response, such as sea level rise and snowmelt timing and so on. And further, we try to organize all those standard lexicon used to express the stress, pressure, and so on. If there's climate element addressed, we wanted to recognize, so we did in the document. And further, and after the strategy has been developed for those regions, we have lots of them. We linked to the California and federal adaptation strategies goal and show the linkage. And further, as you know, we talk about these companion plans, but we address strategy in those companion plan in different level. So in terms of scaling, we are analyzing this level species, habitat, and provenance. And in the reporting, in the main document, we address in this level, but for the companion plan, it touched to kind of every scale except for species. So that's what we did in California in the development stage. Okay. So in terms of implementation, when you talk about conservation, we just can't talk about document. We need to talk about content. So where are we in California? So we are completely mixed bag that we have so many disasters the past years. Probably you know that. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but this is about draft monitoring graph and showing basically from 2011, we are in drought and we are in a huge drought in the long term too. And that triggers a lot of problem like mass tree deaths. 129 million trees died at least in the past 6 years. Mega fire are happening. The top pie chart is showing how many acreage burned by big fire happened in 2020. And this is already outdated because 2021 information is not in. So more than 60% of big burn are coming by these 2 years. And and right now we're doing 2025 update discussion, and we are finding some species are locally extinct due to drought. So that's dark side, but we have also bright side. Because of that, state administration is getting pretty aggressive about climate change government. And the scale of the funding to address sustainability of water, for example, is just getting up and long term. And in addition, we have a lot of emergency funds. And along the process, we really need to upscale, we need to have a more fast restoration project ongoing, but we have to scale up too. So permitting level streamlining process is happening. In the context, conservation landscape is changing. It becomes ecosystem approach, climate change approach, and so on, you can imagine. And it comes down to us. So a lot of adaptation mitigation centric grants are happening. It's marginal again, but also we need more climate change related information. So in a nutshell, we have a lot of integration happening indeed. And indeed, a SWAP implementation is driven by climate adaptation. A lot of priority for SWAP addressed by those state grants, not necessarily with SWIG. Data integration is happening on the ground because grant projects, for example, need those adaptation layer putting in one place, connectivity information, refugee information, diversity information, all in one place now. We started installing 40 weather station with biodiversity monitoring device. It just is happening right now. New program is happening. Restoration grant program now received funding for nature-based solution. And now we have some wildlife corridor dedicated funding source. And a SWAP is going to be the priority for that. We just passed we just finally finished this Kramas River dam removal permitting process. And it happened last week, but this is going to hit all those one province conservation priority in the SWAP and so on. But the baseline here is because we did this companion plan development process, people are running with this SWAP. And that's really giving us opportunity to further the climate adaptation and biodiversity conservation. Now, in terms of using this guidance document, recommendation, use it. There's so many ways to do. Probably you noticed that my reflection about what we did of SWAP 2015 is kind of reflecting of some of the recommendation in the document. But we will definitely use more for evaluating our 2015 update climate element. For developing 2025, we'll definitely use as a checklist. We'll use those information to organize our update summary. And we'll probably link all those 7 principles to strategy we developed through 2025 to
Excuse me,
show.
Yanko, I'm sorry, I need to double check if you have much more. I've got to make sure that we give some.
No, this
time.
is the last slide. Okay.
It is, okay.
Okay. So and so on. So there's many ways to use, and again, there's big information source. So please use it. So that's all what I have. Sorry, a little bit longer.
That's okay. No, thanks for that. I just want to make sure I know that Lee and Jen need to leave for another meeting right after this. So thank you for doing that. So our final speakers, what we're going to do is in lieu of Q&A, we're going to go right into the breakouts after this. We'll give some guidance there. But if you do have questions, please put them into the chat. We will capture those and we will follow up. So our last speakers for today are Lee Davis, an ecologist and habitat staff specialist, and Jen Newmark, Wildlife Diversity Division Administrator, both from the Nevada Department of Wildlife. Lee and Jen, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jason. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm pulling this up now.
And we see it.
All right, well, thanks everyone for your time. I'm gonna hop right into this. My name is Lee Davis. I'm an ecologist and habitat staff specialist at the Nevada Department of Wildlife. I worked on our 2022 SWAP revision, which was just submitted in October, November of this year. Worked very closely with Jen Newmark and her staff in our diversity division. But specifically, the division I'm in is engaged very much on restoration and rehabilitation on the ground projects. But as a state, our overarching challenges stem from a diversity of ecosystems ranging from high alpine snowmelt dominated systems to extremely arid basin range and Mojave systems with their own unique climate drivers, compounded by the fact that we're also the driest state in the union, and we've not to mention the regulatory ownership and multiple other social issues that we all face. Give me just a moment here, sorry. All right. But our challenges are really the same as everyone else's at the end of the day, and that's how do we translate knowledge into action? For our 2022 revision, we chose to address climate change from a habitat perspective while recognizing the need for species-specific actions, and we had three broad goals here. One is to address climate projections for Nevada in a broad manner. The second was to address habitat-specific threats and potential actions, and the third was to really address species-specific threats and potential actions. And so how we went about that was providing an overview of Nevada's climate, including a comparison of historic baselines to midterm future projections. We did that in our chapter 2, which really sets kind of the abiotic baseline of the state and the base of our document. We worked with NatureServe staff at the national level to produce a habitat climate change vulnerability analysis for a subset of our key habitats that really cover the majority of the state and the majority of our SGCN. And we also drew on some past work from our 2012 SWAP for SGCN to address species-specific actions based on an earlier CCVI in conjunction with expert opinion, literature reviews, and other resources. And I am going to blow through this because I've got a lot of slides, so please stop me when you're ready. But a little bit of background for summarizing climate for across the state. Here's some screen grabs from our SWAP revision. We ran future projections, very standard for RCP 4.5 and 8.5, based on local downscaled CMIP5 data. And the point here is that it doesn't matter if everyone knows all of those acronyms. The take home is that we used well-vetted national data that have been incorporated into a lot of products like the 4th National Climate Assessment and California's 4th Climate Assessment. And we obtained those data through the CalAdapt program, which is a regional initiative that includes a number of scientists from Nevada as well. And we used a series of 10 GCMs from CalAdapt that other regional specialists, other climate adaptation specialists and climate scientists already believed were reasonably representative for the state. So that took some of the pressure off of us and allowed us just to focus on output and facts. And the way we went about this was by engaging with our state climatologist, engaging with a number of climate adaptation centers, especially the Southwest CASC, having conversations with people from NIACS, Northern Institute for Applied Climate Scientists, and talking with multiple regional specialists and others from places like USGS, right, to kind of help guide where we were going. So I want to take a quick detour back to species because we were very habitat focused in our revision. Nevada has over 890 regularly occurring taxa, and in our 2022 revision, we have 366 SGCN. That's an overwhelming number of species to consider. However, we know some of those species have more immediate or pressing needs, and we did want to clearly identify those needs along with our knowledge gaps in the species accounts so that we could help prioritize action moving forward. And we very much want that to be a living document. So we did look at climate risk based on qualitative literature reviews, expert opinion, and others data sources in our ranking decisions for SGCNs. And we did identify knowledge gaps, research needs, and monitoring needs in those species accounts as well. So we have a little bit of a game plan for moving forward to identify these. When it comes to summarizing climate vulnerability, however, for habitats, like I said, we did this for a subset of our 19 key habitats. So that's already 19 key habitats. It's a much easier ask than 366 SVCN and 890 taxa, right? But we really wanted to produce spatially explicit climate change vulnerability products that could help feed into other threat-based analyses that we were beginning to use for our ecosystem management here. Again, we worked with NatureServe, in particular Pat Comer and some of his staff, to run these HCCVIs for a subset of 7 of our key habitats that cover about 96% of the state. Like all vulnerability analyses, these incorporate measures of exposure and resilience to change to calculate a standardized index of vulnerability for each system. But you can see here on my screen, I've got a map that's showing this analysis for some of our sagebrush habitats in the state with our high and low sagebrush habitats. And the nice thing about this is that it is spatially explicit. I can take these raster outputs, I can use them in other workflows, and I can summarize them at multiple scales across the state to help feed into anything from state level planning down to regional level planning. And that's really, really important for the way we conduct business here. The more important thing here as well is that we next engaged in coming up with a resist, accept, direct framework for habitats, which is something we hadn't done really effectively in the region or in the state. And when we move to looking at this in a minute, you can really see why this approach of having spatially explicit analysis for habitats is really so powerful. So like I said, we developed this menu of general habitat related actions based on our RAD conceptual framework to explicitly address anticipated and desired future conditions at near, mid, and long-term scales. And so when I'm talking midterm here, I'm talking like that 2035, 2064, and that's really our focus because that's where we think we can affect change and have some impact, right? It's 2200 is a long time off. We can't really impact that. 2035, however, 2040, the things we're doing on the ground today are going to have an impact there. And this approach really does feed back into species specific actions. So when we get to translating threats to actions, here's an example subset of our resist, accept, direct framework. And I'm showing a screenshot from our draft swap as it exists, showing some of the direct portion of that framework. And we already have large areas on the landscape experiencing complex system level shifts, including whole cell vegetation shifts to invaded conditions that have crossed ecological thresholds. But like every agency out there, really, we need to change the way we do business. And so where we can resist change through increasing system resilience, we want to do that. We want to protect the core of habitats and to expand those cores, but we don't want to simply accept change where resisting is unfeasible if it results in a net loss of landscape values to fish and wildlife, right? To the extent possible, we would rather facilitate change in those areas. And so we're kind of laying out a conceptual framework, not only for high level planning, but also for people engaged in on the ground planning. And again, when we pull back these spatially explicit products, we can begin to pick out landscape areas where we might be looking feasibly at resisting change, where we have low vulnerability based on climate. And we can also begin to pick out a number of areas where we really might need to quickly begin considering directing change or accepting eco states that we might not be super fond of and that might not provide the values that we need. And again, this really incorporates into other threats-based ecosystem management analysis that we're engaging in. And we can also begin to do things like overlay species occurrences, corridors, migration corridors, climate refugia corridors, and other products on this to pick out priority areas when it comes to, say, targeting bill funding or targeting IRA funding on the landscape, which is a big ask that we've had in the West, and I'm sure everywhere else, right? And of course, at the end of the day, a lot of this is reliant on a solid monitoring approach, which we also incorporated into our monitoring, inventory and monitoring chapter in the SWAP revision. We talk a lot about monitoring, but we know it takes dedicated funding, dedicated personnel, dedicated programmatic oversight. And so we address those issues as well. As an agency, we are moving to modernize tools like Survey 123 and field maps, remote sensing products, having automated analytic output, really focusing on not being reliant on INDAL specific methods, but being more reliant on core methods that are used across multiple agencies and working in agency partnerships where feasible to do our monitoring, and doing very targeted monitoring for multiple and single species I&M needs. Doing long-term trend and condition monitoring is something we've identified as a real need. And then also looking at treatment effectiveness monitoring. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the idea is we need interpretable, timely, actionable output so that we can manage, if critical winter grounds in the state are declining in quality, we want to know that, and we want to know it early so that we're watching it. If cool season grasses are declining across their range in the state, which is projected to happen we want change point trend detection to know when and where that's happening, so that we can also track other issues that are related to it, and obviously species related issues. And so I know I kind of blasted through that. I didn't want to linger too much on it, and want to leave us time for questions here. If you have other needs outside of this, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Jen. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, hey, thanks, Lee. So like I said, if anyone has any questions, please, in the interest of time, we will get to them. Just go ahead and put them into the chat and we will follow up. I saw the one from Harriet. So Harriet, we'll make sure we follow up on that one. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to put out into breakout groups. And what we'd like to do is I'll put some questions in the team. I'd like to ask each of these breakouts to select a leader and a reporter so that we can capture the notes on the discussion, and ask you to start off by spending about 3 minutes just thinking about a couple of questions. And then if you would take some time to talk through these issues, what we'd like to do is talk through about how have you incorporated climate change into your SWAP, either using the past guidance or the new version. Are there lessons learned that you can either share? And we're looking here for both successes and failures, right? What is it, the things that we can learn from what we've done, what's worked or what hasn't when you try to incorporate climate change in your SWAP? And then what additional questions do you have related to addressing climate change? Or what other opportunities do you think that exist to address the issue? What we'll do is we're going to break out for about 20 minutes, and we will come back and just hear from the top 3 practices from each breakout group. So looking at the number of teams that are here, we've got, we're going to do about 4 breakouts, and it'll take a second. So I'm going to shift some of the folks around who told me that they'd be able to participate as some of the leads. So I'm going to send the folks over, and we'll come back in about 20 minutes. Hang on tight. Jess and Chris, do you need me to put you in a different room? Not sure why you didn't go over. one of these days I'm going to figure out my mute button, honestly. Although my wife wishes she had one, she could just press it. But anyway. All right. Mark, are you back? Do you want to lead us off on the follow-up?
Yeah, so do we want to just kind of a few points from each question, or just a kind of a general?
Maybe from each group. In fact, if you want, I can kick off from, I was in group 3.
But it's just from like a perspective from each question that we asked, or just in general?
I think in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we had, folks from different, perspectives, from just having a completed action plan to just in the beginning stages of revising. And I think this idea of habitat vulnerability was sort of a common thread, maybe looking at that, doing a deeper dive, or maybe, for the first time looking at habitat vulnerability rather than just species vulnerability. I think there was some sense that, we need to be more comprehensive. It's a big undertaking, but I think, from what I heard, the guidance is in the past has been useful, and the new guidance will be useful as well. Making climate change solutions actionable, going from the theoretical to the actionable during this revision plan was something I heard. Amplifying, how does climate change amplify some of those threats that are recurring? Maybe not, flooding might not be a specific threat, but it's certainly going to amplify other threats. And then just, I think that how do we, involve partners in, in this thinking process about incorporating climate change or SWAP, especially new audiences. How do you make these plans more relevant to more groups? And I'll end there.
Well, I'll go from breakout group 3. And the biggest takeaway that I heard from the session, I'd ask any other folks who were there, was in terms of lessons learned, is that political views can be really important to this process. And depending on the nature of your political leadership, they may be resistant to climate change as a term, but we're now in a period where everyone sees the impacts. So we don't have to call what we're seeing climate change. It doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is that you're managing those impacts, be it drought or flooding or what have you. Making sure that people relate to the impacts and understand the need for action is really what we need to be looking at. So I heard some requests in there for some guidance on potentially being able to talk about these issues in those terms.
Jason, this is Sean. I'm not sure what number group I was in, but we heard similar threads about one piece that Mark had mentioned, kind of that so what piece is what we were calling it. Okay, you got all the science behind you. Well, what does that mean in terms of actionable items on the ground for the habitats, for the species? But we also heard a lot about that very exact same thing about, well, what's the best way for us to talk about climate change in our state with the political apparatus in which we work, and how do we communicate that? In some places, clearly you have staff that are a little leery or wary of coming out and using the words climate right next to change. And you put the two of those words together and who knows what's going to happen. So maybe there is some of that, that social science piece that is going to be very necessary right now to help people figure out the best way to do what needs to be done.
Hi, Lily here. I believe we were group 1. So some of the things that I heard, there was a bunch of different stages. So some people were further along than others when it comes to this topic. But for the most part, what I heard is that a lot of people didn't have climate change as its own specific part. Rather, it was incorporated into multiple different parts of the SWAP. And that a bunch of people were interested in new guidance and how they can utilize this information moving forward. So that is very great to hear. As for the lessons learned, some of the good things that we're hearing is there's an increase in tribal capacity for a lot of people. So I mean, tribal capacity and capacity, my bad. And so they feel as though there's going to be a lot more opportunity to incorporate climate change as more of like forefront than an afterthought, making it incorporated into every part of the swap. More of a holistic approach, if you will. And I heard a lot about working with partners and how it could be really beneficial because then you get different viewpoints. And that is helping with increasing the effectiveness. And lastly, when it came to the third question, one of the focuses that was mentioned was on building resiliency and focusing on the things that you can do rather than getting overwhelmed with all of the things that you're trying to do. Just focus on action steps and being proactive. That's another one that we did discuss a lot. Making proactive steps. Specifically, we were talking about looking at vulnerabilities of various species. That way, when we look down 10 years from now, we can be more effective and guide research better.
So one more group. Jacob, did you have a group? No.
I was in Sean's group.
Is there any more report outs? You're on mute, Jason.
My God, and this is being recorded. So I think there were 5 groups, and I think we've heard from 3.
Okay, no worries if you're not ready to report out, but would ask if you did take notes in your group that you send those to Jason, and then we'll compile that information, send it back out to you. We'll also compile any questions that were in the chat, and we'll get answers to those questions and send it back, as well as a link to the recording post haste, so that you have that.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Mark, can I just give a quick shout out to Lily and thank her for her help? She's been taking notes behind the scenes today, which I really appreciate.
Thank you so much, Lily. Appreciate that. Thanks, everyone. Okay, give us your feedback. You know, we want to make these as useful for all of you. You're our captive audience, State Wildlife Action Plan coordinators and implementers. So give us any feedback that you have on how we can make these of greatest use to you. But appreciate everybody's time today, and looking forward to giving you some fantastic news right around the holidays, hopefully. So get some rest over the holidays. It could be a busy 2023, hopefully. All right.
Thanks for organizing, Mark.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.